Loving our neighbors, man, that's hard. It may be one of the most complicated things that we are asked to do as Christians. Why? Well, we probably don't know our neighbors that well, and also, we don't really want to do it. It's easy to love those that benefit us, that love us back in return. It is quite wonderful, actually, to love those people. But what about the people who don't do any of that? How then do you treat people who don't really like you or know you? This is when loving your neighbor becomes hard, because we are still called as Christians to wish them well too, even the cantankerous ones. All right, I got to tell you a story. Everything I'm about to say is 100% true. That's not a good way to start, is it? Here we go. It was one of my first years of pastoring. I was forced into an unwanted altercation with a church member. And he's the kind of guy who kind of challenges everything that everyone does all the time. And it's not just me. It really was everything with everybody. So, it's the closest I've ever been to a fist fight. I'm 26 years old. He is north of 75. Here's the situation. He came to me and wanted to sell fresh eggs at church on Sunday morning. Like an actual egg stand. Like set up a table and charge people money, the whole 9 yards. And this wasn't a, hey, I brought some fresh eggs from home. I would love to give them to you in the parking lot after church, and then you slip him a $5 bill. No, he wanted you to walk into the narthex, there be a welcome table, and next to it is his booth where he sells fresh eggs. And he came to me wanting to know and seek my permission. Well, my response, it was not great. I'll say that. Here's exactly what I said. I said, well, I think this is exactly what Jesus meant when he chastised rulers for turning a house of prayer into a den of thieves. I was young. Man, he yelled at me so much, like screamed in my face, threatened to punch me, and it gets worse. He got blood red. He points his finger in my face and he screams. It was so much screaming. And this is what he said: "Don't make me whip you like a baby, boy." Now, I took out all the expletives in that sentence. I remember my adrenaline pumping. I was shaking and I snapped back as fast as I could think it. There's only one baby in this room and it's you. Sit down. It's a 75-year-old man. And I was 26. And this is not how it was supposed to go. We had left the rails. There was no redeeming this moment at all. And it got worse. All of this was on Sunday morning at church too. He sits down in my office and he is seething. He gets up and charges by me, bumps me with his shoulder as he slaps the door and heads out. I remember taking a deep breath, and my associate pastor is standing right there. She saw every bit of it. Not 30 seconds later, he comes busting back through the door a second time. He's still screaming, but this time he's crying. He's shaking. He's completely flooded with emotions at this point. And I kid you not, he gets down on his knees and he pleads for me to change my mind so he can sell his eggs. I pull him away from him, I get some distance, and then he starts to crawl after me. He is on all fours, screaming, apologizing, crying, and saying to me this is not how he wanted this moment to go. And that's the scene. I think about this man from time to time. He sits in my mind as an archetypal person of people who we are still supposed to love, even though we don't want to. I learned from this encounter that people who come at you like bullies, who use force, they're uncooperative, unconscious to their own actions, that you can't match their fever pitch. It doesn't get you anywhere. But you also can't give in either. The squeaky wheel does not deserve the grease. That's how you handle passive-aggressive and really aggressive people, by the way. You don't fight back and you don't give in. You just let their anger sit in the room as long as you need to. I wish I could have been a non-anxious presence in that moment, but all I did was heighten his anger and his fever pitch. And you can't do that. You've got to be in the moment, able to still calmly bless them for who they are. But man, that's hard. It takes work to engage and to love unconscious, cantankerous neighbors because they are exhausting. But have you ever stopped to think, so are you to them? That's probably even more difficult to consider, but this man was looking at a 26-year-old young pastor who thought he knew it all. And he just needed a moment, and he couldn't get that moment with me. I blocked that for him. Unless we are able to self-reflect in the moment, in real time, then we're just as unconscious as our neighbor is to us. And I think this is what ultimately makes neighboring so hard. It forces us to put a spotlight back on us. Because when we do that, we then see our flaws. It makes us have to ask ourselves, why did I say that to my neighbor? Why did I lead with that story? Why did I feel the need to one-up them? Why do I do that? And this level takes a lot of emotional work. And it's exhausting too for us to get there. Because when we put a spotlight on us, we realize there's things we could change too. We're not perfect. I was introduced to a relationship theory years ago by the Gottman Institute. We love them here at First Baptist. We teach their theories on Wednesday nights every few semesters during cross training, and the Gottmans are fantastic. They have a theory that's called bidding. And I talk to couples that I do premarital counseling with about the concept of bidding every time. It is marvelous. So, we bid for each other's attention all the time. I'm doing it to you right now. And there's one of three ways that you respond to a bid. You can turn towards it, you can turn against it, or you could turn away from it. Now, the most healthy response to a bid is you turn towards it. This is vital for healthy marriages, friendships, parenting. And if someone bids for your attention and you turn towards it, you stop what you're doing, you listen to what they want to say. You give them your attention. You affirm them with your presence and your time. Now, the next best response, although it's not great, is you could turn against their bid. Someone bids for your time and you lean in. You turn towards it, but you're not nice. You're nasty. Your wife asks you, what do you want for dinner? And you snap back. You literally ask me that every day, and I don't care. Now, you turned towards her bid, but you turned argumentatively, abruptly, loudly, overbearingly. These are all signs that, yeah, you turned towards your partner, but it wasn't out of love. Now, conflict starts between people at this level when you turn against each other's bids. But that's still better than the last one, which is to turn away. An example of this would be your spouse washes the dishes without being asked to, and then turns around and smiles at you just like they had solved a Rubik's Cube for the first time and deserved to be celebrated. Now, all you do is look at them and roll your eyes, and you walk through the kitchen hardly acknowledging the effort even took place. You literally turned away from their bid. Now, you're not mad. You're worse. You're indifferent. Man, that's the worst. There is a ton more that could be said about relationships and bidding. But for now, let me tie these two things together. Neighboring is hard because we have to engage our neighbor's bids. And it is really easy to turn away from our neighbors, almost safer at times. Let's say your neighbor's watering the flowers and they wave at you in the morning. They bid for your attention, but next to their flowers is a political sign in the yard that you disagree with. So you pretend the sun's in your face and you don't see them waving and you move on with your life. You may even turn against them. SEC fans do this all the time. My first church was in Pine Mountain, Georgia, that I pastored very close to Auburn. And man, people hated each other just based on the bumper sticker that you would have on your car, which in some ways is funny, but there are far worse examples too. I mean, do you remember in the height of COVID when we didn't know anything about anything, and all we were doing is kind of like getting as much information from TV as possible? And man, there were so many of these little moments that came out. My favorite, but it's also terribly sad, was the woman who was in Old Navy, and she got so upset about being forced to wear a mask, she literally took her entire cart of stuff and just dumped it out in the middle of the floor and stormed out. It doesn't take much for neighbors to turn against neighbors. It doesn't take much to even turn away from your neighbors. It usually is a deeply unconscious act when it happens. Now, this concept of bidding, it matters to us because it connects us to our neighbors. How do we hold what others bring us? What is our initial response, even when neighbors catch us off guard? It needs to be love. Now, that doesn't mean that you get bulldozed. No, you don't match their fever pitch and you don't back down. Love can mean that you stand your ground and have appropriate boundaries, but it also means you turn towards them. All right, so I'm not intending for this to be a nice cognitive behavioral lesson. It actually fits squarely into our scripture lesson today. It's the call of the first disciple. So, Philip and Nathanael are called to follow Jesus, and there is a lot of bidding going on for each other's attention. So let's jump back into the story. This is John 1, starting in verse 43. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and he said to him, "Follow me." So this is our first bid. And Philip turns towards Jesus. He leans in, and because Philip does, the story progresses, which I think is just a neat way to think about Scripture. Ultimately, this story is one about the disciples choosing to follow Jesus. They know very little about him, but they open up themselves to their neighbor, and they turn towards Jesus, and because of it, it changes everything. Imagine that. By turning towards someone's bid, your life changes for the better. Their life changes for the better in ways that you would never be able to imagine. All right, back to the story. This is verses 44 and 45. Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter, and Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him. We have found him about whom Moses and the law and all the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." This is our second bid. This time it's Philip and Nathanael. But Nathanael doesn't turn towards Philip. As a matter of fact, he turns against it. Watch what happens in verse 46. Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And then Philip replied to that bid and said, "Come and see." What Nathanael said to Philip, you need to know, it is not nice. It is derogatory. It's dismissive. He even takes a jab at Jesus' home place, ridiculing him from being from a small town. He disparages his upbringing, his neighbors, and even his neighborhood. He's being quite cantankerous. This might have been just a simple, unconscious act by Nathanael. But look at all the energy that it creates in the text. It sends ripple effects into the story. And if Philip would have been an unconscious character himself, he might have taken that attack personally. turned away from Nathanael, moved on with his life, or even turned against him, and they got into a back and forth. And then Nathanael would have never have introduced him to Christ if that would have happened, and he would have never become a disciple. And we just would have had the same old cantankerous soul that Nathanael is for the rest of his life. But Philip actually doesn't meet his fever pitch. He doesn't fight back. He doesn't give in. Instead, he loves and blesses Nathanael and responds by saying, "Well, come and see." And then Nathanael does. Because Philip was unconscious enough to receive the energy of Nathanael's bid, and he still turns towards him, and not once, but twice. He doesn't meet Nathanael's fever pitch. Instead, he encourages and blesses, welcomes and invites. And because of Philip's ability to love his neighbor, Nathanael's life is radically transformed. He becomes a disciple. What I see happening here is that because Philip turned towards Nathanael, his neighbor, Philip was conscious enough not to respond negatively to this cantankerousness of Nathanael. And because of that, healing occurred. Lives changed. And there is just so much good that comes for them because of this interaction. Just two neighbors bumping into each other, and it changes their life forever. I wonder how many of our relationships would end differently, for the better, if we took time to love our neighbor.